what we're doing now is I've posted a couple of videos on Genesis 3 and why it is not about Satan.
Yes. Yeah.
And with the video I'm about to make, I'm going to present the artwork from the Renaissance, from the Ninja Turtles, showing the temptation of Eve depicted as a woman, the
Yeah.
top half with a snake bottom half. I'm going to have to tell the story, the legend of Lilith from Talmudic legend, whatever.
Yeah.
And Dan McClellan already mentioned how Irenaeus and one other, I think Justin Martyr, one of those couple of people wanted to associate the serpent with Satan. But that's 600 years after the original story, in which there was no Jesus.
No.
So my thought is a prophecy is when you predict that something is going to happen. You give some kind of specifics about that thing, and then you have to put a time frame on it. There has to be, like when the three suns shine as one, whatever. There's got to be a time that or an expiration date, right?
I mean, I suppose if you're doing sensible prophecy, but that sort of sounds like your expectations are too high, Aaron. I mean, that's the way you or I might do prophecy, but in antiquity, well, it's not even you're absolutely right on this, in that there's no prophecy in Genesis chapter 3. But what is happening is that by the time of the Second Temple period, by the first century BC, first century CE, there is this tendency among groups of religious Jews to start picking through their texts and reading them like coded messages. So potentially anything could be a prophecy, could be a message, and we know this, we see this because this is what's happening all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls. Are these ancient scriptures that are being twisted and turned, and half the time just ripped, or most of the time just ripped completely out of context in order to provide a view to the people who are writing this literature of their own times, of their own circumstances. So it all becomes the what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the fodder for anyone to say pretty much anything, so long as they can cobble it some way into some shape of something that might sound like a prophetic utterance.
One of my favorite examples about the way that Christians do prophecy is, and I'm going to have to look this up because I might be misremembering. I think it's in 2 Kings, and I can't remember who's telling the story either, but in one translation, he's being hounded by dogs. People are chasing him using hunting dogs, and they are biting at his hands and feet. And in that context, that's just a story about that guy. But in another translation, instead of biting at his hands and feet, they say they pierce his hands and feet. And in the translation where they say pierce instead of bite, well, then that part of that sentence, that part of that story, and not the whole story, but just that part of that sentence, and only in that translation, that's prophetic.
Yep,
because that prophesies Jesus.
Yeah, that's Psalm 22:16 in the English, 17 in the Hebrew, and famously, it's based on a textual variant, which is almost certainly based on an error in the text. So it's when the English translations of that text, which inaccurately translated as pierced, should be translating it as dug. He dug my hands and my feet. Because that's what the word means in Greek, where the translation appears. There is a manuscript in the Dead Sea Scrolls which preserve a reading that could potentially look like this. However, that also looks like it's just an error. But even there, if you're going to if you're going to translate it as some suggest it should be, it would be dug. They dug my hands and my feet, and it's like digging a hole, right? Like taking a shovel and sticking it in the dirt and removing earth. It's not stabbing with a sword or a knife or nails, as this case would be.
I'm glad that I recognized that I was giving the wrong citation.
Oh, okay.
So that
Yeah.
So thank you for correcting me on that.
Sure.
But on some of these prophecies, and this one in particular, in Genesis 3, it talks about how the serpent is the craftiest or most subtle of all of the wild beasts.
Let's talk about that, because there's a lot more to that than ever comes out in any of your English translations. This is a play on words here, a very clever one. Actually, see what I did there? It's clever. So in the verse, subtle. I know, right? In the verse right before that, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, and bear in mind, so the numbers, the chapter and verse numbers, these were added later, right? So this was just a running narrative at one point in time. So Genesis 2:25 says, speaking of Adam, the man, and his woman, not his wife. Speaking of them, it says that the two of them were naked, the man and his woman, but they were not ashamed. And then there's this transition, and it says, now the Nachash, or the snake, was more clever than all the animals of the field. But that word, which we translate as clever, in Hebrew is arum, and it's identical to the word that appears in the verse right before it, which is translated as naked. So the writer is very cleverly playing on this connection between nakedness and knowledge and cleverness, as we see in the story as it's coming forward. This is foreshadowing a bit here, right? There's this encounter that the snake and the woman have at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and she eats from the fruit as he tells her what is going to happen. It so happens she takes the fruit, she eats it, her eyes are opened, and she becomes like a god, knowing good and evil. So there's something going on here. The writer is cluing us into this. There's this connection between the nakedness and the innocence of the human couple and the cleverness of the snake. I think it probably was not lost at all on ancient people. I'm sure you're already aware of this, that snakes in antiquity, in the ancient Near East, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Sinai, they're magical creatures. They are in many places worshipped, in many places they're feared, and they are so presented as kind of like these chimeras of creation that are just beyond the understanding of people. I think it wasn't lost on them, the writer of this story in particular, that the snake is the only creature that sheds its skin every year, right?
Well, the only one they would know about, yeah,
I guess, right?
Yeah.
So the snake was more naked than all the animals of the field, is literally another way you could read this. So yeah, So this is, I think, in the story too, we tend to, because all of us are reading this through post-Christian eyes, we tend to see this as some sort of contest between good and evil. That the serpent is represented as an adversary or an agent, a bad faith actor in this story. And I don't think, on the face of it, I don't really think that's what's happening at all. Lots of English translations will translate this as the serpent or the snake being more cunning or crafty. I much prefer clever. You can use the application the to the same word, and I think this is a little bit less loaded, less moralizing. It's just a way of pointing out that the snake knows what's going on, much more so than anybody else in the garden.
One of the things I think about it in the translations of a room is all the Christians, when they try to translate this Hebrew word, they come up with for how it's going to be deceptive, right? They have to put in that it's deceptive somehow. And a couple of the ones that I've read said that the snake straight out lied, but he didn't.
Not at all. It's just it is the exact opposite. If you take
they always say that. And there's another reference to like in Corinthians where they talk about just as the serpent deceived Eve. And by the way, when it says the serpent deceived Eve, Christians will tell me, well, see, that shows you that it's Satan.
No, this is Paul misreading the story, or Paul maybe being among the first to apply this sort of an interpretation to this story and connecting it to Satan. Perhaps he's to blame for this. As far as we know, there's another place in Corinthians, 1st or 2nd Corinthians, where he talks about how the God of peace will soon crush Satan underfoot, which is a direct allusion to the curse that's pronounced on the snake by Yahweh in later in Genesis chapter 3. But what Paul is doing there is he's exaggerating what God actually says, because in the text he says, I shall set enmity between you and the woman, speaking to the snake, between your offspring and hers. He will bruise your head and you will bruise his heel, using the exact same word. And it's not it's not an emphatic expression. It's like striking and making a mark, basically, is all that's there. No, Paul overloads this when he's alluding to this passage to say that God or Christ is going to crush Satan under his foot. So yeah, it's the people were doing this.
So when I read this, when it talks about this enmity between your seed, which, let's weigh two hypotheses, because I'm saying that this is talking about a snake, and the fundamentalists that I'm talking to, they watch the thing about with Dan McClellan, where Dan McClellan, he makes a very good argument, and these Christians decide that they don't have to listen to any of his arguments. They don't have to acknowledge any of his evidence because he's a Mormon.
Of course.
And that means that it doesn't matter that he has all these degrees in Bible scholarship, from different universities. That it doesn't matter that he was a student of Francesca Stavrokopoulou. It doesn't matter. We could just dismiss anything he says simply because he's a Mormon.
Yep.
Even though he cites other Bible scholars who are not Mormon.
I mean, this is the thing, right? This is a common approach to the text within critical biblical scholarship. And within critical biblical scholarship, no one's checking your faith credentials at the door before they're citing your work or promoting your ideas. So long as you can back up what you have to say, that's good enough for the guild, which is populated mostly by Christians and Jewish people, but there's plenty skeptics, there's atheists in the field, and we're all approaching the text the same way. There's Mormons in the field, and we're all approaching the text the same way with these critical lenses, which basically say the Bible is a human book, regardless of whether or not you think it's the quote unquote word of God or authorized scripture. At the heart of it, as we're investigating it, you have to study it like it's a human book, like it's any other book from the time period, from the region. And we have multiple pieces of cognate literature which have helped us tremendously to gain a stronger understanding of the Bible, because that's what scholars are doing. We're just looking at the text and saying, what is the best explanation of this text without having to resort to, angels and demons and gods.
The argument or the counter argument that they present to me, the fundamentalists, is that essentially they can discount anything that Dan McClellan says because he's Mormon, and therefore he doesn't have a Trinitarian interpretation. Well, if I have to interpret it the same way that you do before I can even talk to you, then you're telling me I can't argue with you unless I agree with you.
They can only have arguments among themselves, apparently. That's it, right?
Yeah, and so what they've done is they've managed to find a way to change everything by they can read the Bible into the Bible, whatever they want, by changing what all the words mean. So that when it says serpent, it really means Satan. When it says animal, it really means angel. When it says woman, it really means Israel.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So I mean, to be fair, I mean, there have been times in history, I believe this is probably drawing from, a pre-medieval or a medieval approach to the text when Christian fathers and leaders and theologians used to do this with the Old Testament, is they would mine it for every little bit that they thought they could uncover that had something to do with Jesus or the church or so this is and as I mentioned, like this is an approach that they come by honestly, and that I mean that to say that that this is a way that people have just been approaching these texts for thousands of years. It's nothing new. As a matter of fact, it's the way that much of the New Testament appropriates the Old Testament, just by cherry picking texts and pulling them out of context and spinning them in such a way to make theological points about things that the texts were never intended to speak on in the first place. That's just doing theology. That's just, as I often put it, that's just doing good Second Temple Bible exegesis. This is the way they did it. So
one of the other
I'll just qualify that and say, but that's not, if you're interested in what these texts meant in the moment they were first written down or first cobbled together from older sources, or if you're interested in what the sources meant, if you can tease those out of the texts that we have that have survived to us, then you have to look at all the creative ways, inventive ways that people were reading these texts in the Second Temple period, in the medieval period, among the early church fathers. And you just have to say, that's not what the text originally meant. It's not what it was ever intended to say.
There's a couple of other references I'd like to get your opinion on. When people tell me that the serpent of the garden, because it doesn't say that it was Satan in the garden, it says it was the serpent in the garden. Doesn't say that he was the cleverest of all the angels. It says he was the cleverest of all the animals. So on. But these fundamentalists will tell me that, well, it's referenced elsewhere in the Bible to identify that the serpent is Satan.
Isaiah chapter
I'm thinking
14.
if the serpent was Satan, Genesis would have said that the serpent was Satan. But instead, we have to jump all the way over to
Isaiah, probably.
No,
Isaiah
Ezekiel.
4 or
Actually,
Ezekiel 18. Is it 18 or 16? Might be 16.
I think it's 18. Give me a moment to look it up. 28.
28, that's it.
Yeah, and this is a reference to the king of Tyre.
Yes.
Where they say, you were the seal of perfection, and you were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. So how does that... It was the king of Tyre not a descendant of Adam?
Yeah, a real guy that that Ezekiel was really delivering a prophecy, not a or a rebuke to. And what scholars will tell us, I know something that I did very early on, just to sort of illustrate the absurdity. Really, what somebody has to do is they have to set these two stories side by side and really look at them to see how similar they are. What you have between them is this common idea of something taking place in God's garden in Eden. But after that, just about everything else is completely different. The way this figure is described in the Ezekiel oracle is nothing like any of the figures that are described in the Eden story. So I made a video a number of years ago. It was one of my first ones on YouTube, where I was responding to another Christian apologist about this specific text, and I took images from my favorite English translation of the Bible, the Brick Testament, or the Brick Bible, by Elba Sperling. It's fantastic. So I took these images from their masterpiece and put them on the screen, and then just followed through, and I read the story from Ezekiel as a way to illustrate. Just, you've got the images on the screen and the text from Elba Sperling on the screen, with me reading from Ezekiel in the background, and they're nothing alike one another. They are just not the same story. Now, scholars will tell us, and you can go also to, there's another text in Isaiah chapter 14, which speaks of the fall of this figure that's called Kalel, the shining one.
Okay, since you brought that up, I have been telling people, because this was my information, that when Isaiah spoke of Hallel ben Shahar, how art thou fallen from heaven, he's ridiculing Babylonian astrology, because Hallel ben Shahar, the morning star, the light bringer, is Venus. And with the coming dawn, Venus never ascends above the moon, and with the coming dawn, Venus has to disappear into obscurity. That Isaiah was not talking about angels or actual people.
I mean, I think within one of the wrinkles that comes into play here is that throughout the Hebrew Bible, at one point in that text, it talks about Hallel talks about being raised above the stars, the Kokavim, and within a Hebrew, like an early to mid Iron Age Hebrew worldview, the stars are oftentimes, you'll see that translated throughout the Bible as the host of heaven. This is literally the armies of heaven within this Hebrew mindset. When they look up into the sky and they see the stars, they think they are looking at the armies of Yahweh, this celestial army that's going to, that the gods call upon to do battle when needed. Judges chapter 5, for example, the Song of Devorah, which is one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible, talks about the stars coming down and waging war with the Israelites against Sisera, the king of Hatzor. So I would say there's a wrinkle here where I think this naturalistic interpretation as a critique of Babylonian astrology is right, but it's also being set within sort of this coded mythology where this personification is depicted among, in the service of God in the heavens as part of the whole the what's called the tzabah of Yahweh, the host of Yahweh, the armies of Yahweh.
One of the other things we have to talk about is when I ask people where the Bible says, because they tell me that the Bible says that the serpent of the garden was Satan. I'm like, where does it say that?
Oh,
well, it doesn't say it in Genesis, does it? Where it would. It
before
would.
before we move on to this, can I finish saying, because we got sidetracked from Ezekiel 28 for a second.
Okay.
If I could just finish, what
Sure.
scholars will tell us is that in Ezekiel chapter 28, what the prophet is doing is he is melding like an existing myth of this cosmic figure in the Garden of God in Eden, who confronted Yahweh and who confronted God and ended up being cast down from the mountain of God and onto the earth. So he's using this myth as a background to his oracle against the king of Tyre. Now, importantly, and I'll point this out again, I think there is probably at this early period quite a bit of mythology surrounding this fabled place, Eden, God's garden, way out in the east. It's actually, Babylon, but there's this mythology that's developed around this place. There's probably several different stories that are tied to the origins of the cosmos that feature this place, and we have this one version that survives in Genesis 2 and 3. We have snippets or echoes of other versions that looked quite different that you see maybe in Ezekiel chapter 28 or in Isaiah chapter 14, but that doesn't mean they're the same story. It means they come from like this larger milieu of Eden mythology, let's call it.
One other that I want to reference is when I ask people where does Genesis say that the serpent in the garden is supposed to be Satan? And they say, well, it doesn't say it in Genesis.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it in the first book of the Bible. It says it in the last book of the Bible, right? By a completely different author, 600 years later.
It's like Scooby-Doo when they pulled the mask off, right? Of the bad guy. That's what's happening.
But the thing is it when it says, Satan is that old serpent, well, it doesn't mean that old serpent, right? It doesn't mean the one from the garden. And the way that we know this is because, one, he's enormous, right?
Yeah.
And he's got all the horns and all the crowns, and he's got 7 heads.
So,
yeah. Is a detail that I think, if the serpent of the garden had 7 heads, I kind of think that even if they didn't, even if they neglected to tell you, oh, by the way, the serpent is secretly Satan, they should have mentioned that there was, and the 7-headed snake was was the most clever in the garden because he has more brains, literally.
Yeah. So you know which serpent this is that is being referenced here.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the 7-headed serpent shows up throughout Asian mythology. There's a lot of different religions that have
in the Bible too.
Yeah. So explain.
So, and this is there's crossover here between what you see in a lot of the biblical texts and what we see in the Canaanite literature that survives from Ugarit. Ugarit is a city that's located quite a bit north of Israel, well north of Tyre, in fact, and it was sacked by the Sea People at the end of the 12th century BCE. There's a pile of text written in cuneiform. It's written in a Northwest Semitic language that's quite similar to Hebrew, but in cuneiform script. We call it Ugaritic, and it preserves all these myths, all this mythology about Baal and Anat and El and Yom and Mot and these gods that were worshipped and followed in this Canaanite city. This is our best representation of broader Canaanite mythology, and there's a lot of correspondences with various biblical texts. We encounter texts within the Bible where Yahweh is described in very similar terms to Baal as he's depicted in the Ugaritic texts. One of the things that we see in common is this figure, this very fearsome creature that's called in the Ugaritic text either Lotan or Litan. In the Bible, he's called Luitan. This has been transliterated into English. This is Leviathan.
Okay.
Luitan.
Now,
and we
is
see
Leviathan related to Tiamat?
Maybe. I think it's. I would say not directly, because there may be some relationship there, just by virtue of the fact that they're sea monsters. I think
Both of them
something to
being
do.
giant snakes.
Yeah. Tiamat is. I mean, the description of Tiamat in the Enuma Elish is tricky, but also the fact that the Leton or Leviathan is a male creature. He's a boy, and Tiamat is female. So excuse me, I'm not sold. I'm not sure. I would say that if there's a relationship between them, it's pretty distant.
But that's fine. I mean, I have a snake named Jormungandr, which is a giant male serpent from Viking mythology. I know that there's no influence,
none whatsoever,
to Tiamat at all.
But I think there is like the Leviathan looks more like or is more closely associated to these other creatures that appear in the Hebrew text called the Tananim, which just is translated as sea monsters. The sea monsters were created in Genesis chapter 1. I think it's either verse 24 or 25, right before the creation of human beings. It's kind of interesting that that word, which is translated to create, is only used 3 times in Genesis chapter 1. The first time to describe when God began to create the heavens and the earth, is sort of a general statement. It's used for the creation of mankind. God created the man. He created the male and female. And then it's used for the Tananim, the sea monsters. There's a scholar by the name of David M. Carr, a brilliant biblical scholar at Union Theological Seminary, who has written a book called the Formation of Genesis 1 to 11, where he has, I think, argued pretty convincingly that this little snippet of a mention. Oh, by the way, God created all the Tananim, all the sea monsters. He thinks that this is a blind motif, like a residual echo of some of what's happening in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth from which this is drawn. The Tananim, the sea monsters, correspond with the Babylonian creation myth to creatures that Tiamat herself formed in order to fight against the gods. And there's a couple of beautiful passages there which describe these fearsome, terrible creatures that no human has ever seen. But Leviathan tends to be grouped with these creatures. And we have echoes of this fight that Yahweh has with Leviathan, in which he defeats him, and he crushes his 7 heads. I think it says that he's mentioned in Isaiah, in Psalms, and in the book of Job, and I think it's in the Psalms that he talks about crushing the 7 heads of Leviathan. The same thing happens in the Ugaritic mythical texts, where it talks about Baal fighting with and defeating the fearsome 7-headed Lotan or Leton. And in that text, it calls him the twisting serpent. And it's almost in Isaiah, and I don't remember the reference offhand, but in the text in Isaiah where Leviathan is mentioned, it basically provides the same description, word for word. Leviathan, the twisted serpent, with 7 heads. So this is the creature that appears. This is the great serpent of Revelation. It's Leviathan, the great adversary of Yahweh and Baal, that gets progressively. That's the other thing we see when you track these texts chronologically. When you attempt to track these texts chronologically, you start to see an evolution in the thinking about this creature. In the book of Psalms, Yahweh like fights with him and has to defeat him. In Isaiah, he's still an adversary of him, but he basically just kind of wipes him out without any trouble. By the time you get to the book of Job, Leviathan is reduced to this giant fish that Yahweh plays with.
I got a very different interpretation out of that. Yeah,
let's hear it.
When I read Job's description of Leviathan, he's talking about a crocodile. He's talking about a normal crocodile. And when all the details, when his mouth is like great doors with the many teeth, so that's not a fish. And his back is covered with all these shields closely braced together, and that is definitely the back of a crocodile. And when it talks about the way that it moves, there's a number of features, but I mean, very clearly the inspiration for Job's Leviathan is a crocodile.
I would agree in terms of the physical representation. I would still challenge that entire diatribe by Yahweh is all set within these very strong mythical terms.
Would you agree with this? I mean, this is very clear that what the animal that Job is describing, or the monster, the Tananim, it seems that we're dealing with different types of Leviathan, just like we have different types of Tananim. But the descriptions given in these, 3 or 4 places in the Bible are very different creatures.
Yeah. I mean,
one of them's got 7 heads.
Yes, that's fair. So we do. I would say, I guess that you're dealing with different creatures. I think you're dealing with a development of what this is over time. No, I don't know that everybody had this sense always that there are different types of Leviathans, but that it changes, or the perceptions of what this thing is changes over time, from the old Ugaritic sea monster eventually to the much tamer giant crocodile creature that God plays with. I'm
thinking of it like this: when you have the new version of Clash of the Titans comes out, and they have their Kraken, and it doesn't look like the Ray Harryhausen Kraken at all. Now we've got a CGI Kraken, and they're very different designs. So the different storytellers just have different designs for their monsters.
No, I think you're right. So it's but I would say that the creature certainly over time gets less and less fearsome, especially when compared to Yahweh. So he's no longer fighting with him. He's playing with him by the time we get to Job.
Do we have any further contributions to the notion that Genesis 3:15 is talking about a prophecy of Jesus or about Satan? I mean, because we could close up here, and it would. It's been a fabulous. I might take pieces of this and put in the front video, and then upload the rest of it more or less intact.
Sure. Whatever you want to do is fine.
Yeah, I might just put it up in two versions, because we've been talking for
45 minutes.
Yeah, quite a ways. But it's been good, and I enjoyed it. Good. And I want to thank you very much for taking part in this.
So, I mean, I guess maybe I'll say one thing, something that I've encountered, and something I'm sure you've encountered, is that apologists like to settle on this idea within the text that that it says that the offspring of the snake will bruise the heel of your offspring, and your offspring will bruise the head of the snake's offspring.
Which obviously doesn't apply to Satan at all, but does.
These are humans, right? Like humans and snakes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Humans, excuse me, the devil's children, whatever
that means,
are not biting at people's ankles. Right?
Not.
So, and if they are ankle biters, then they wouldn't be that great a threat, would they? But if he's talking about snakes, well, then we're talking about a common experience for most cultures around the world. Things that everybody can relate to, because venomous snakes exist even in cold climates.
Is that right? Oh, see, I didn't know that. That's cool.
There is there's the adder in England, and then there's a Norwegian viper.
Good
which
Lord.
I was surprised to find out.
I lived in Norway, and I had no idea I was in danger of being.
These are not like Australian snakes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
They're not I understand that like maybe one or two people have ever died from an English adder.
Wow. But still, poison snake. So
it's about as bad as an American copperhead, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. And I remember having an argument with an Australian about how dangerous our animals are between Australia and Arizona, where I was at the time. And I said, yeah, well, our snakes will just barely kill you.
So he won. I've heard apologists really settling on the fact that this word here, translated as seed or offspring, is singular. That it's one person, that this is a message about an individual. So it must be Jesus, the one person who could defeat Satan. But this is just a poor way of understanding how the original language worked, how the text worked. The word there, which is usually translated as offspring or seed, zera. The accents on the first syllable, is very commonly used as a collective, meaning offspring. There's plenty of occasions throughout the text where it appears singular and is clearly with reference to larger groups of people. So that's usually what I would say in response to that. I did want to say something else, though, about some of the interesting cultural background of this of snakes. I think within the Hebrew religion in particular, this figure in Genesis chapter 3, the Hebrew there is the Nachash, which is usually translated as snake. Interestingly, it's the same root from which we get terms related to magic. Also the same root from which we get the word copper. And I think this is not by accident. We know that in the Sinai Peninsula, in the late Bronze Age and in the early Iron Age, the Egyptians were particularly keen on controlling this place because there was an awful lot of copper mines in that area. Some of these places have been excavated by archaeologists. At one site, which is particularly interesting, that dates back to, I believe, the 9th or the 10th century BCE, they've actually managed to find a fashioned snake out of copper in this area that was connected to a temple for some forms of ritual or worship. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because there's a couple of other places within the Bible. There's this very interesting famous story from Numbers chapter 21, where Yahweh sends what are called, what are often translated as venomous snakes to go and attack the Israelites. The term there is literally, it's Nachashim Seraphim, snakes of fire. You might recognize Seraph in there as the same creature that Isaiah sees when he has his vision in the temple.
I was actually thinking something else. Is that Sera that starts with a T? No,
it starts with
I'm
a sigma.
thinking of the Hebrew word Sepha, because there's a venomous snake in Israel,
Right.
and that's what they called it. So
no, this is totally different. So, but the set off in Isaiah's vision in chapter 6, these are generally understood by scholars to be like snake-like creatures, similar to what we see in Egyptian mythology and in some places in Mesopotamian texts. But it's in this story in Numbers chapter 21 where Moses has to fashion the bronze snake and set it on a pole, and whenever anybody looks at this bronze snake, they're healed. And then it's the word used there is the nakash nekoshim, the bronze, and using the close relationship between, sorry, the nekash nekoshet, that's it, the close relationship between these two words for copper or bronze and snake. The next time and the last time we read of it is in 1 Kings chapter 18. 2 Kings chapter 18, which tells of the reign of Hezekiah. And this is something that Hezekiah does. The king in Jerusalem, we're told, cleans out the temple and removes all the other statues and images of other gods, just clearing it out for Yahweh alone, and then specifies that he also threw out Nehushtan, which is this bronze serpent that Moses supposedly had crafted in the desert. So I mean, I think all of these things are connected. There is something there to do with the snake cults that and the copper mines in the Sinai Peninsula from this earlier period.
Share with me, if you have the time and you can, a link to this bronze serpent that Moses fashioned.
Like a picture of it?
Well, no, just
or
that I could look up later, because I'm not familiar with this one.
This story?
I mean, is this the staff that turns into a snake?
It doesn't turn into a snake. It says, I could just read it to you quickly here in Numbers 21. Actually, it might be easier just to go here. Just give me 1 second to hold this.
We've been talking about snakes for so long, I had to.
Here we go. So, actually, I'll just read this to you. This is I have a book coming out where I talk, and this is one of the things I talk about.
Be sure to. I would love to talk to you about your new book if you
So it's going to be published on the 15th. So we can talk after that, and yeah, I'm excited about it. So here's this story. Look at this story in Numbers 21. This is a story which is set in the time before the sons of Israel had arrived in Canaan, the land that their God had promised to their ancestors, while they were traveling through the unforgiving desert of the Sinai Peninsula. The people became disgruntled. Life on the road in the desolate wilderness is hard. And this is Numbers 21, verses 4 to 5, says the people became impatient And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you led us up from Egypt to die in the desert? For there is no bread and water, and we detest this miserable food to our core. Then out of anger, Yahweh unleashes upon them deadly serpents to punish the people for their insolence. And here's what it says in verse 6. So God sent against the people Nachashim Hasadafim, the fiery snakes, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. So this expression is commonly translated as poisonous or venomous snakes, but we should not sidestep the mythical element at work here. The creatures are more literally the fiery Nachashim.
I have often heard that the fire referred to with fire-breathing dragons, dragon usually refers to a snake in these old books. And the fire is actually venom.
It's probably, I mean, that's probably where all of this connects.
And a lot of this could stem from spitting cobras.
Yeah, I bet, right? So, but I think that a lot of times when we read these texts that sound, especially when you're providing a more natural translation to some of the Hebrew words, we should take them seriously in terms of what they're describing. Are these snakes that are literally like fire snakes? We don't know. I'll continue here. These creatures are more literally the fiery Nachashim, the fiery snakes, the plural of the same word from Genesis 3, the Nachash. Moreover, the word fiery is one that many will recognize from other biblical texts where it is used of God's divine attendants, the Seraphim, the burning ones. That's the word literally means just burning, right? So are these really just desert serpents? After the people cry out, Moses petitions Yahweh for relief, and he responds in a peculiar way. Here's what the text says in verses 8 to 9. Make for yourself a set-off, using that same word that's translated as burning. So make for yourself a set-off and mount it on a standard. So whomever is bitten, who looks at it, he shall live. And then it says, Moses made a Nechash Nechoshet, which is, not a set-off, or, maybe it's a type of a set-off, but this literally translates as a copper snake or a copper serpent, and mounted it on a standard. And when anyone was bitten by a serpent, a Nachash, they would look at the Nechash HaNechoshet, the serpent of bronze, and recover. So it's a very strange story.
And this is where we get the codices that is now the symbol for medical.
Yes, for the medical, the ambulance and the it's true. And as far as I'm aware, I think I heard someone say once in a podcast I was watching or listening to that there's this kind of imagery that goes back to the medieval period as well. It's on coats of arms and things like that. So, but the point is, we've got these echoes throughout the Bible of this Nachash, this serpent, and I think there's a relationship there. Yes, the Nachash in the garden is a snake. He's not Satan, but there is something magical, something mystical about him that creeps up in some of these other places.
It talks.
It talks. Yes, it's more clever than all the other animals. Of course, it's not a normal snake. But some of the.
I got another question for you. On the notion that if you take the word offspring to be singular, and so Jesus is supposed to be the offspring of Mary, what then is the offspring of Satan? If the serpent is supposed to be Satan, then what is his offspring?
I have no idea how that connection gets made, because it's the same expression. It's exactly the same that's used for both the woman and for the snake. The only difference is that they're the one's biting ankles and the other one's kicking them So that's it. That's the only difference. So, but you would have to you would have to sort that out with a Christian apologist, how they square that circle. And undoubtedly, it involves some sorts of very creative gymnastics, as it always does. So,
Dr. Kipp Davis, thank you very much.
absolutely, it's my pleasure.